Because he does that and there's really, I don't think there's any reason for it, but it's just my personal opinion.
What?
I don't think there's any reason for him to go out of court with that. It's helpful, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I didn't think anything was like.
James, I have a meeting. I'll be home at about 7 to 7:30.
That's all right. I got plenty of electronic devices
I can
to
go
take
get
notes on.
That back.
All right.
Oh, and I saw a piece of mail that was still, it's addressed to you.
Okay.
It was in your box. You want me to grab it?
No, we'll get it
What
afterwards.
is.
Yeah, I didn't even think about anything. People haven't quite figured it
I meant
out
to
yet.
mention it at our last meeting.
Probably a Christmas card or something that came in at the end of the year. Or Google does the updates of what they did for the year.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Could be that. If it is, I might stick it back in the box too, so you know.
Okay.
Those are handy.
Just saying, got to get these named plates right, you know.
Oh, we got a lot of people.
It's back.
Oh, no.
Find my old prescription stuff. And so I'm just like, trying to read something.
Uh-huh. Do you have readers or anything to even try, or those don't work for
I
you?
did, but it's like I got it like here or
Yep.
here.
That happened to me. I had to get new glasses and because my other ones broke, so I had nothing to wear. And so I got the readers, but I did a lot of computer work and it was just making me so dizzy because
Yeah.
the blurry. I was like, it's better to wear nothing and squint.
Yeah.
Good. Got back from Bend.
Enjoy your trip.
Yeah, it was pretty pleasant, all in all.
It's kind of fun, huh?
Yeah, it was all right.
Did you learn something?
A couple of things. I think the most thing that'll stick with me the most is that guy from the Terrebonne Water District talked about how they identified their number one issue that they had to
Okay,
overcome.
thank you. I was on that. Yeah.
They focused in on that. They were able to get that out of the way and help them proceed much better after that.
Well, good.
He took a pretty simple approach to planning and
Yeah,
for the future instead of a complex one.
good.
Yeah, he was, I don't know if you saw him, but he had
Cover that one.
a speech impediment because he had a stroke,
Uh-huh.
but he's a very smart guy.
What was this?
A special districts conference in Bend.
Yeah.
So like water districts, fire districts, parks and rec districts,
Very cool.
ports. They're basically the insurance company for all the special districts.
Okay.
And a lot of their educational stuff is how to avoid lawsuits and stuff.
Stay out of trouble.
These don't like.
The important stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't see very well.
A lot on
Makes
public meetings.
sense.
Have it in front of me if I want to read it.
That's a good idea.
The small influx of like, go sign up for that. You gotta get this done. Got it.
That is a picture of me.
And they were saying that when we vote, it needs to be recorded how each person voted
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
instead of it was unanimous. They didn't like the unanimous.
Oh, yeah. They
You
saw
know,
it.
I mean, a lot of the votes are unanimous, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Cool.
if somebody just sits there and doesn't say anything, that I guess I don't know how to record that, but it wouldn't be a yes vote or a no vote. If they abstain, that needs to be recorded. I don't know what the punishment of that is, but that was what they were telling everybody they need to do.
Not punishment as much as like best practice. So if you go to a
Yeah.
lawsuit or something,
Well, yeah, I mean, that, for the most part, I think their advice is pretty good. I don't agree with everything because that's just my nature.
It's always good to hear and to see what other people are doing, and
Yeah,
if you can take a couple little bits and pieces, then it was a success.
Yep.
Collaboration is always encouraged.
I ask them if the safety meetings, if they get canceled or postponed, if they have to be rescheduled, because in the fire service, that seems to happen. Have a safety committee scheduled and it has to be postponed. Well, they said you got to have 12 a year,
Huh?
come hell or high water, or you might get slapped by OSHA. So
But if we did,
uh, hopefully we can start doing that because we haven't been getting 12 done a year.
Yeah. I guess that's true because fire department, you never know when everybody's gonna have to jump up and run out. So,
Yeah, so just schedule it first part of the month, and then if that one gets, canceled, then schedule another one and another one. Just make sure you get it in there somewhere.
It's always the hardest meeting to get everybody to attend too. How's it going?
Great, how are you?
Thank you.
Counselor?
Super popular. Oh,
You have to get somebody there that's controversial. So
Yeah.
you can invite me to the next one.
there you go. Sure, goodies, goodies. Snacks. And I'm ready to take a nap. Your picture up there, just mean mugging people.
No, you're zooming in, Jim.
He's doing.
oh, I wonder what hat I had on. Mean mugging.
Yep, mean mugging.
Okay.
Just drink it or no? What? Blink it.
well, all right, it's 5:30, so I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Agency Board meeting of February 18th, 2025 to order. Paula, will you please call the roll?
Stacy Coburn,
Here.
Walter Denstadt,
Here.
Scott Hagy is absent, Kristen Littlebeck,
Present.
Marcy Long,
Here.
Dan Richardson,
Present.
Marcus Swift is absent, Ben Ring.
Here,
Thank you.
Tim McLaughlin, present.
Everyone who's able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance with us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yay.
Late. Roll call.
Yay.
No. Now, let's go up here.
The next item on the agenda is item number 4, approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? Okay, no additions or corrections to the agenda. I will take a motion for approval.
I'll move approval of the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Ben, okay, you got it. Seconded by Ben. Okay. All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Or abstained? Okay, motion passes. Next, we have the approval of the January 30th minutes. Did anyone have any corrections or additions to the minutes? Okay, seeing none. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
move to approve the minutes for January 30th, 2025.
I'll second. Thank you. It's been moved by Ben and seconded by Kristen to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, we're going to have 6A, our presentations of our annual audit for fiscal year 2023 to 2024.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Dan Spots, Economic Development Officer for the city. And thank you very much. And I am pleased to introduce our CFO to provide the audit, and then I'll follow with the report. So Angie Wilson, please take it away.
Good evening, members of the board. For the second year in a row, we had a KDP certified public accountants do our audit, and they have an independent auditor's report that says they audited the basic financial statements of the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Agency as of the end of the year of June 30th, 2024, and have issued the report therein dated December 4, 2024. They conducted their audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States. As part of their audit, they perform procedures to the extent they consider necessary to address the required comments and disclosures, but were not limited to the following: the deposits of the public funds, indebtedness, limitations, restrictions, and repayment, budgets legally required under ORS Chapter 294, insurance and fidelity under bonds in force of required by law, programs funded from outside sources, authorized investment of surplus funds, and public contracts and purchasing under ORS Chapter 279A, 279B, and 279C. In connection with their audit testing, nothing came to their attention that caused them to believe the agency was not in substantial compliance with certain provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, including the provisions of Oregon revised statutes as specified in the Oregon administration rules, the minimum standards of audits of the Oregon municipal corporations. So we did get a clean audit with no write-ups, and so we're always very pleased and happy when we get those good results. Just to highlight on a couple of things with the year-end audit of June 30th, 24, the assets of the agency exceeded in liabilities and deferred inflows of resources at the close of the most recent fiscal year by $4,297,190 net position. The agency's total net position increased by $900,790. This increase is attributed to an increase in investment earnings of $127,081 due to increased interest rates. Also, the agent's liability decreased by $570,949. This was primarily the result of debt service payments of $600,000, partially offset by an increase in other liabilities. And then just one more thing to highlight is that as of June 30th of 2024, the agency had $3,541,052 in debt outstanding compared to $4,168,020 in fiscal 2023. The $626,968 decrease resulted from the annual principal payment of the $600,000 and the amortization of the premium of the debt of $26,968. For further information regarding debt, you could refer to more in the audit book. So if you have any questions, or if you don't have I think you all received a copy of the audit, but it's also posted on the website for additional resources for anyone. And that would complete my presentation.
Are there any questions for Angie? No? I'm just gonna make a comment. I think probably this is the place to put it, that you and your team did a great job, and you kind of gloss over it when you say, that there were no findings, but that's really hard to do. And so we just want to say thank you for doing that for our agency. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angie. Chair Long, thank you for those comments that cannot be underestimated.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oregon Revised Statute 457.460 requires the agencies to annually submit a financial report. This appears starting on page 57 of your packet. This is prepared under contract with Elaine Howard, who also was so helpful in guiding us through the substantial amendment process over this past year. One thing to point out, the annual report technically is through June 30th, 2024. However, to avoid some confusion, we've included the goals and objectives that we discussed earlier in 2024, even though those were not actually approved until the substantial amendment in December. So, I'm sorry? A little closer to the mic. Thank you, Roger. Appreciate that. It always sounds like I'm shouting. You hear me okay?
Yes.
So the goals and objectives, for just basically for clarity, technically, if we wanted to include the goals and objectives, we would have been doing the previous ones, and they've been updated through the substantial amendment, so we thought it best to include the new ones here, and that's what you're seeing now. A couple of points within the report. On page 60 of your packet, you show the expenditures, money received and expenditures during 23-24. The following page, projected investments coming up. You see the tax impact, of course, on the districts on page 62 of your packet, and then call attention to some of the projects that we have funded 23-24, also on page 62 of your project. So here is where you see things like commitments for Basalt Commons, some of the investments we have made, $50,000 to the farm stand, that's Stelzer Enterprise, the Mint, $50,000 investment, the Dalles Inn for architectural and investment, $50,000. Some additional minor improvements to the Williams Building over on 4th Street across from the Civic Auditorium, and to the Legion Building, which the owners there are converting the upper portion of the Legion Building to office space. And those are some of the highlights from the report. If there are any questions from the board?
Any questions?
None.
Yeah.
Right, I thank you.
I gotta jump back up on my. Okay. Let's see. So next we have item 7, public comment. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject that does not later appear on the agenda. 5 minutes per person will be allowed. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak? Yes, Tim Shekel. I think Paul's going to make sure your mic's on for you.
Hello? Is that good?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Tim Schechtel. I live at 3511 Sandlin Road here in the Dalles. For some of you who don't know me, I purchased the Mint with a couple of partners in 2005 and have been renovating the building over that time since when funds and time allowed. And our latest project was kind of ready for submittal a while back. And we did get started in 24 with primarily our own funds, which were going to be a portion of that project anyway. We, like other projects, after, the maximum indebtedness issue was kind of popped up. And so we had to kind of back off a little bit on what we hope to accomplish in 2024. And so we've and just kind of on hold for a while, maintaining the primary objective of that grant was to build out the facility to accommodate the growth of Freebridge Brewing, which they've been very patient with us and very supportive this whole time. So our goal is to now revise our project budget and submit that next month for your consideration with the help of Dan and Josh. I think we can do that. So we just kind of wanted to give you an update. We are committed to completing that project this year. And with your assistance, I think we'll be able to accomplish that. So just a brief update. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Appreciate it. Is there anyone else? Eric?
Hello, I'm Eric Gleason, 704 East Street, the Dalles, Oregon. I'm just here again to kind of talk about the First Street project and my concerns with that. It's been in the planning phases for quite some time now. And initially, the planning and design process included local stakeholders and community members, but this hasn't really been the case for quite some time now. And I think the project has really kind of suffered from that lack of input and with the public and stakeholders into the whole design process. You know, we're at 95% or close to 100% on the plan. We really haven't had any design consultation or anything with the public for 5 or 6 years. Maybe some kind of individual outreach, but nothing quite like we had recently with the Federal Street Plaza. I mean, I had the chance to go to that meeting and it was great. You know, the public got together, they got to see designs, options and stuff, and got to put input and stuff like that into it. And we really haven't had that with the First Street project in at least a decade. And the project has kind of been moving along without that kind of ability to kind of influence it for quite some time. So I think it's really time to really step back and kind of reconsider at least parts of this project. And one of the things that happened at that Federal Street open house is I had a chance to talk with Commissioner Ring, and he had kind of an idea that maybe would allow for the project to both move forward and also to kind of reconnect with the community and really get kind of ideas and updates on the designs kind of things. And his idea was to kind of split it into 2 phases. One, you know, we know that we need to do some of the infrastructure work in the street and stuff like that. So maybe the first phase would be to redo the infrastructure in the streets and redo the streets themselves. And then the second phase would be to work on the sidewalks and the design and the trees and the lights and all of those kind of details, which would really benefit from the public input, the design. So I think that was a great idea. And I think that's kind of an example of the kind of things that happen when you bring people together to kind of talk about a project, that you end up with a project that's a lot better, a lot more workable, and fits better with the community than one that kind of doesn't benefit. So I think we really need to just kind of step back and do that, because current project, especially with regards to the retaining walls along First Street, really doesn't fit in a whole lot of ways. I mean, we're removing part of the historic structure of our community, and we like to think of ourselves as historic, the Dalles, and, you know, really sensitive to our history, and we're kind of removing it by the current design. So I think we have to be more sensitive to that. And the current one doesn't really meet the design, our own community's design guidelines, doesn't meet the National Register design guidelines that we're supposed to follow as well. So I think we really need to step back and reconsider.
Are there any questions for Mr. Gleason?
What do you hope to see when they're all done with this project? What's your vision?
My vision is kind of a revitalized First Street. And I think we can do it by, you know, kind of stepped approach. I think, you know, the plans kind of okay the way they are, but they aren't really very sensitive to what we have there. They're kind of just duplicating Second Street plans and kind of throwing them on First Street. And I think we can do better. I think we can take advantage of the history that's down there and kind of play that up.
What do you think the big purpose of having a First Street is?
I think the First Street is kind of a vital link to the community.
You do.
I do. And you know, that street when it was built, well, it's part of the initial grid pattern. of
Yes.
Dalles. And it was Main Street, right? At that time, the river was flowing just on the other side, right where Interstate 84 is now. It's built to a width that's larger than any other street in town. The sidewalks are wider than any other ones in town. So it was kind of built to be kind of the main street where people into our community
Yeah.
greeted into our community. And I think we can kind of make it that way again with some really thoughtful design.
Well, for me, I'm Mr. Insensitive. You're very sensitive of what they do down there. In my view, that street made sense in the 1800s, the street right alongside the railroad. So that's why I ask you, I don't think we need a street along the railroad. I think it's kind of a hazard. There's a train wreck. I don't want to see a bunch of cars squashed. I don't think that street is important. I don't mean to step on the history, but a bunch of crumbling concrete isn't something you can just go in and revitalize it and make it safe and everything. If it's old and crumbling and falling apart, it needs to be replaced with something safe. And I'm all for, let's get the priorities straight. Now, maybe somebody here can tell me if the tug of war between the city and urban renewal has been resolved, because there seemed to be some disagreement on who is responsible for what part of that. And I don't know if that's delaying progress, but it seems like maybe it is. Because my feeling is we need to get started on that tomorrow to tear up that water main and replace it and fix the safety issues down there. Once that's done, then I'd be interested in prioritizing, see how much money is left over. So that's the way I stand on that. I don't really think we need a road there, but I'm just one guy on this board and they'll have more say so than I do. I just wanted to give you a different perspective. I'm not being disrespectful of yours, but I'm not that big into the history. I didn't grow up here, so it's not nostalgic for me. And I don't mean to stomp on the Chinese that had some history down in there or anything like that. But, a lot of the stuff in the town is falling apart. How much can we preserve? I mean, we have buildings that we can't even paint because if we got up there to try to paint them, it'd be too dangerous. They're crumbling and falling apart.
Did staff want to address the issue between the city and urban renewal going back and forth, or is that something you think is better for a different time for the update?
Addressing in the sense that the Urban Renewal Agency committed to funding this project early on, and the Urban Renewal Agency is going to continue to fund this project. So if there's any changes to the funding, I have not received direction to do so on that. So I think that's kind of where we stand with
So
that.
is there something that's holding us back from getting going, or?
No, as
weather?
as Mr. Gleason mentioned, our plans, I'm expecting to start reviewing plans this next week. That was the timeline that was provided to us. And these 95% plans that we talk about, there's a couple tweaks that were made to them. That we've had the plans for a little over a year, but so there were some tweaks, previous discussions that we had here. There was a change to extending a section of right behind the Federal Street Plaza. So when you're standing in the plaza, you look out and it's going to create more of a screen between the plaza and the train. Very small tweak. Also upsizing that 8-inch line to a 12-inch line to allow for future development. It was very nominal cost, so it really seemed like the best change there. But very, very few changes other than that we'll be going forward and reviewing these plans very soon.
Any other questions for Mr. Gleason? Yes.
Thanks, Josh. Do you feel, is it staff's opinion, one way or the other that there would be value in having public input on street furniture or other of the sort of surface level design elements, or do you feel like those are squared away and
I think to Mr. Gleason's point, there hasn't been much public involvement with this project for many, many years. And when it first started, it was because this was a very elaborate project that went underneath the train tracks. It was much different than the project that we're going forward with now. Project we're going forward with now, to be honest, I don't know why Urban Renewal is overseeing it compared to it's a public works project. I mean, we're talking about a street, we're talking about needed infrastructure. The streetscaping we're talking about are, wrought iron fencing along the train tracks. We're talking about some benches, some lights, landscaping. There's not a lot to it, and the reason it is rather utilitarian is that we are in a way matching what's on Second Street. We didn't want yet another street that looked a little bit different than Second Street. And then we had specific conversations actually about the paver tile patterns that we were using, because there's different paver tile patterns going under the underpass to the Maritime Terminal than there is on Second Street. The paver tiles on Second Street, we can no longer source them. So we've had these types of conversations. How can we get a blend between Second Street, First Street, and the Union Street undercrossing? So overall, though, yeah, it's a very basic design when it comes to streetscaping. At this point, community input. I'm always open for community input. Feel free to reach out, but I'm not sure what could really change with this project that we would get a lot from a public participation process at this point. It's nothing, it's not as exciting as the Federal Street Plaza, I'll tell you that.
this is just my 2 cents now, shifting from question to editorial. We do have 3 potential projects that are all adjacent and hopefully mesh to some degree, a plaza, First Street, and a Tony's site development, Lord willing, creek don't rise someday. I do feel like we would gain some value, or the public would have gain some benefit out of seeing those things explained in some format at some point, and the way they interlock and work together, and how it's going to change the look of the place and all of that. And whether it's another meeting or some other outreach, I don't really have thoughts on, but I do feel like that would be something at the appropriate time we'd want to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I would be happy to share either with whether it's an update with the Urban Renewal Agency, with City Council. I think my point was more of like the design elements. Like there's not a lot I think that we can shift on that, but as far as sharing it, yes, I think once we have it together. One different thing about it, we have an engineering company that's working on this compared to a landscape design firm that's working on Federal Street Plaza. So for instance, we don't have renderings of First Street. So it's like when you look at the 2 products visually, for people that are looking for this picture, trying to figure out what it's really going to look like, First Street, it's a 2D model compared to the Federal Street Plaza. But I'd be happy to look into trying to spruce that up a little bit to try to make it a little more visually appealing so people can really buy into it and understand what's going to happen.
Thank you. I guess I was thinking down the road a little bit, so to speak, when we have some more certainty about Tony's and we've got these 3 projects that are sort of interlocked.
Question for Eric, maybe. So I'm trying to remember exactly what you were talking about. It seems to me like your primary interest / concern had to do with some of the structural elements that are kind of in that wall there. And it was never clear to me, like, if there's a way to address kind of Eric's concerns, and because it doesn't seem like you're that worried about some of the details up on the sidewalk, but more of that kind of historical element. And I was just curious, like, did that get resolved? And like, there's no way we can do anything like he's suggesting, or is there possibilities?
So I have been working with Eric probably for a year, back and forth on this discussion. We've talked to our engineers quite often. Ultimately, and I think it was 2021, there was the internal group that was trying to figure out the type of wall that they were going to be replacing it with. They chose this Gabion wall style. It's a style that, if anybody's not familiar, it's effectively a square cage that has river rock inside of it. That was the design chosen at the time compared to a poured concrete wall. Gabion wall at the time was cheaper. That was the direction that we moved forward with. Staff's internal team, as well as the engineers at that time. So they moved forward with preparing the plans, getting them to the 95% stage using the Gabion wall design, because that was the direction that they had received. After these discussions I've had with Eric, I have gone back and forth with KPFF. They do understand that there is some historical integrity to these walls. They don't like to use the word ensure or guarantee, but they can't say that their infrastructure will be able to survive, or that the walls will be able to survive when putting this new infrastructure on there, compared to a brand new engineered wall that this infrastructure will lay on top of. So effectively, if you go out there, the sidewalks that are there, the sidewalks are going to be on top of a surface. And some of the rock walls that are out there are 100-year-old stacked rock. They can't say whether or not those rock walls will hold up with this new infrastructure work that's going to be conducted all around it. So, having said all that, I still have kind of pushed and pushed to see if we could try to find other alternatives. And I think they are still looking into some of those, but the only thing that they can really guarantee per se would be what they have already engineered. The walls, the Chinatown walls, have more historical integrity to them than the block over, the block between Union and Court. And those were replaced like what, in the 60s, maybe something like that. They're starting to fail. They're cracking. Those ones will be removed. Those are kind of they're all kind of different styles. If you go out there and look at the walls, there's probably like 4 different styles of walls that are used out there over periods of time. So they are looking into it, but it hasn't been any direction for us to. It would be a redesign. I'll say that. No matter what we do for a different wall, it will be a redesign. It will be additional costs. It will be additional time. So those numbers I don't exactly have, but it'll end up being more expensive and take longer.
And so one of the other things that I asked you to explore, and I think you have, is what if we leave room in the current design to be able to put like a facade or something in the future so that it looks more historical? Like right now, we don't have the funds to change the project or do that, but we're still leaving space for that as a possibility for future generations,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So ultimately, looking into how to attach grommets or some type of attachment points onto those Gabion cages. So at a later date, we could come back with additional funds and attach some kind of, probably secure at that point, like a poured concrete wall. And then at that point, you could go through a process to veneer old, veneer like basalt rock onto it. That was one of the options. The other option now is actually switched to having a cage. Basically, these Gabion walls, let's say they're 3 feet wide. The back 2 feet is going to be the river rock, and then the front foot is going to be basalt rock that would somewhat match what's there. It would also match the rock that's being used on the historic Columbia River bike trail that's going in. So in a way, if you're looking at tying everything together, coming off the bike trail, getting to the bike hub that's going to be at the Federal Street Plaza, you'll have some of those design elements added into the wall itself. But to actually add the additional details, yeah, it would be an additional cost at a later date, potentially additional right of way that we would have to purchase, because it's going to bump it out just a little bit further. So thankfully, the agency owns the 2 sunken parking lots, aside from the owner of the blue building, Tony Zilka. He does own 25 feet of undeveloped land on the east side of our lot.
So one more question, Eric, was there anything specific besides the Gabion walls that you were thinking of that you would like to have public input on since we're at 95%? Or is there something specific we should be thinking about?
No, I think it's primarily those walls because they don't really fit in with the historic character
Right.
or else like that. I'm also a little bit worried about their longevity. I mean, those walls have stood for 100 years and a little more maintenance, they'll stand for another 100 years. And I'm quite so confident about the basketballs.
Okay. Well, thank you. And so obviously, Director Chandler will continue working on this with you in the loop. So is there anybody else have any questions? Oh, yes.
Do we have an estimate on how long those Gabion walls typically will last?
I do not have an estimate. I know that they are being used for, federal infrastructure projects along freeways around the country. A lot of them are down in the Southwest. But yes, they are, constantly used for overpass projects. So, can't, no timeline there, but I would hope quite a long time for those big projects.
And then one more question, if that's okay. How much time would you estimate you've spent with, I'm so sorry, Eric, I know your first name, but I don't know your last name.
Gleason.
Mr. Gleason, and between you and him, and then you and also the architects, about how much time over the last year would you estimate you've spent?
Oh, I don't know.
Sure, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's been, it's been good. It's been, I think a collaborative, productive process. Can't really, put a number on that, yeah, I think it'd be unfair to say one way or the other.
That's fair. Just wanted to kind of maybe just make sure, like, it sounds like we've heard quite a bit and tried quite a bit on this one problem too. So that's encouraging too. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, great. Yes, Victor Johnson.
Victor Johnson, 313 West 4th Street, and first time here. It's a good group. I like this board. I was at the Mint the other night for the review of the project, and I thought it was really great. I didn't really know much about it, and I was pleased to hear that the Tony's building space wasn't going to be part of the plaza. I'm glad that there's actually going to be some kind of a project there, building or some type. So, yeah, it's good. I think people need to be involved, and input's always good. Group think, more people thinking about different things and adding to it is always good. Diversity is strength, right? So, and I've been thinking about this First Street thing too. I'm kind of late to the party. I haven't really been paying attention, but Eric's a good friend of mine, and he's been sharing some of his concerns. And so we went down. We actually met with Joshua and Eric down at the lot a couple of days ago, and it was like sub freezing temperatures. They were champs for coming out and listening to everything we had to say. And I think, I think in hindsight there should have been some direction. Engineers will do what they're told, right? If somebody would have said, "How do we do this and preserve these walls?" It probably could have happened. It's kind of late in the game now. Maybe there's not the money, but the idea of like Gabion baskets going down there is really not a pleasant thought, really. Aesthetically, they don't look good. You're talking about basically like industrial saying chicken wire full of rocks. So even on their own report, they say the aesthetic is like low, right? So I would say it'd be better even if it took longer and it cost more to do it right rather than do it cheap. But sounds like we're past, that ship might have already sailed. So some of these ideas Joshua was mentioning, some kind of facade or some kind of, if something can be done, make it part of the plan. It's like, okay, if we only have this much to do this now, but we're going to make this look nice rather than, I think it needs to be done right, not cheap. So whatever that plan is, I think we should commit to making it look good. I mean, we're going to spend millions and millions of dollars on First Street and then have Gabion baskets down there. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine any designer saying, "Yeah, we're going to spend a couple $1,000,000. We need some Gabion baskets." No, they say like, "How can we shave some money off this project?" And they're like, "Oh, Gabion baskets will do the trick." So, just my opinion, but you know, Dalles is basically a river city cut off from the river, right? And so I think this First Street project is really good. It's a great idea. When I was working with the Blue Zones on the built environment, we did all the surveys and we had several hundred people chiming in. And the number one thing that came up was what they called the front porch, right? What people see from the freeway, how we approach the Dalles. That was the most important thing, hands down, to the majority of the people. I think we had like 600 or 700 people on that, so it was big. So it's really important. We're going to tie in the riverfront trail, the cycling thing from the Dalles. This is how we're going to funnel people into the town and all that. So it's a great project. I'm really excited it's happening, but really think we not cheap out on this aesthetic part right on the front street. So anyway, thanks for listening to me. Thanks for all your work. I know most of you, and this is a great group. I appreciate everything you're doing.
So you heard me talk about priorities.
Hmm?
And so the infrastructure underneath the road and everything is a top priority. Public safety is a top priority to me.
Mm-hmm.
How it looks is a top priority to some other people, not me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm okay with spending more money to make these walls look nice. It's just that all the other fluff along First Street will be affected if we spend a lot of money on the walls.
What
So
do you
I'm
mean?
not worried about how the street looks when we're done. I just want to say you can spend more money on the walls, but you have less money for the trees and the benches and all the other stuff that I call fluff.
That's fluff. Okay, that was going to ask.
That's my opinion, because I'm all about public safety, your front porch thing and stuff. Sure, we want people to look at our town and say this is really nice, but I have different priorities.
Right, right. Well, that's a good point, and I understand that completely. And I would say the fluff, as you call it, can always be at any time. Need more money down the road for benches and trees and stuff like that.
Agree.
So, in my mind, you take care of the most important thing first, and then you take care of the ancillary things later.
Well, thank you for that.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Victor.
Is there any other public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to action item, which is item number 8 on the agenda. Item A is incentive program grant request from Claudia Leash regarding the Oaks Hotel.
Madam Chair, first off, sound check. Is that working?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Good volume.
So starting on page 63 of the packet, you've all been through the process of the substantial amendment over the past year. And of course, there were a number of projects that we have been discussing, some of which had been on hold because of the process of going through the substantial amendment and increasing spending authority. This project is right at the top of the list, and it is really with a lot of pleasure to bring it forward for your consideration. This is the Oaks Hotel, historic Oaks Hotel, located at 200 East 2nd Street, widely known as Sigmund's Flowers because of the business located on the first floor there. The owner, Claudia Leash, first presented this application, close to this application. This has been updated since then. I think it was last March or April, something like that. And we had to put it on hold. So as soon as we had clearance from the council in December, we got back to Claudia and to Michael Leash, her son, with requests that this application be brought forward again. They were delighted to do so. In the meantime, they had secured a $200,000 Oregon Main Street grant to conduct facade work, and that's what you see taking place on the building now. That is nearly complete, about 90%. There is still some restoration metal work to take place on the top and middle cornices of the building. Some new transom windows, restoring some windows that had been blocked in, and restoring some second floor windows, or replacing with wood framed windows. That is all taking place through the Oregon Main Street and through the owner's own investment, which I am estimating, I would ask them to correct me, is somewhere around $360,000, not counting the Oregon Main Street investment. The application before you is for a total of $240,000, up to $240,000. $200,000 of that would be coming from the incentive program property rehabilitation, specifically a $150,000 mixed use grant and a $50,000 commercial grant. Bearing in mind that we are operating under the guidelines as they have existed for a couple of years now, not proposed modifications to the guidelines where we're asking to basically merge these two, mixed and commercial. That hasn't happened yet. We'll be bringing that forward in March. And for your consideration, right now we're working under the existing guidelines. In addition, under property rehab would be the SDC offsets, and this is for 4 upper story residential units. That's up to $10,000 per unit. So in the staff report, we haven't tried to break down any reductions in that. There may be some reductions because, for instance, existing stormwater from the roof or water, traffic, things like that. But that's where we come up to a total of $240,000. That would allow the owners to renovate the first floor for commercial space, reestablish an old original opening that led up to the second floor, and redevelop that second floor as upper story residential. So in reviewing this, we go to the project benefits starting on page 64 and look for alignment with goals and objectives, again, as we modify those goals and objectives over the past year. And we find that goal B, it increases the value of properties within the urban renewal district. Goal C, it returns unused, underused public and private properties to productive conditions. Under goal D, several objectives that we find that this supports encourages the expansion and development of businesses that will expand property values, produce jobs for the people of the Dalles and Wasco County, ensure a more attractive, functional, and economically viable city, restore historically significant properties to productive use, expand availability of family wage housing, including but not limited to vertical downtown housing and multifamily residential housing. And again, goal J, to identify and actively pursue external grant and private resources in order to leverage the agency's financial resources. This does both significant private investment on the part of the owners and also that Oregon Main Street grant that I mentioned. So with that, you have the recommended motion on page 65 under board alternatives, but a couple of things I would see whether the applicants would have anything they would like to add. And then, of course, if you have any questions for the application.
Are there any questions for staff before I bring the applicants up?
So is there some kind of grant that's in jeopardy if we don't pitch in urban renewal money from federal or state or something like that?
The Oregon Main Street grant has been received and is being invested in the building. So if we were not to do this, then we wouldn't be able to proceed with the restoration of the interior of the building. But the Oregon Main Street covers the facade of the building. That's not in danger.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So here's the thing with me. I'm Mr. Public Safety. I don't think the residential area is going to be sprinklered from what I saw looking at the plans.
I will check with the owners. I'm glad they're here because I think it will be. Let's check that.
So go ahead and bring you guys up if you want them up.
Good evening, Michael Leash, representing Claudia. So it looks like that we will have sprinklers upstairs. Yeah,
In the residential area.
Yeah, in the residential area, and and it may end up having to be down on the main level as well once we go forward with putting in the sprinkler system. But based on our preliminary site plan meeting, it appears that sprinklers will be required.
Well, for me, I would like to say the urban renewal money, if we get it, it will happen. Not maybe, not we think it will. In other words, for me to vote yes to give you the money, I need assurance that those residential areas will be sprinklered. There'll be fire suppression.
It's not currently a requirement though, but that's your personal thoughts on that.
Well, I get a vote on whether we give them the money or not.
Fine. Okay. Are there any more questions for staff or the applicants? Yes.
Can you confirm the private funds that have been put in? I think Mr. Spatz mentioned 360K in personal funds that you guys have put into this project.
So we will, by the time we're done, we'll have about $360,000 into it. Yeah. So we still have quite a bit of work to do on the exterior, which roof, transom windows, a lot of metal work that needs to be done, and then finishing the painting, and then restoring all of the 9 large windows.
Yes, Dan.
Sorry, Stacy had her hand up.
Can you talk a little bit just about timeline and kind of expect to get started upstairs and finished?
We would hope to be started by summer.
Summer.
Yeah, I mean,
completion.
there's no reason to delay.
Yeah.
Cost of materials is not going to get cheaper after all the problems in California.
Right. And what's the timeline?
It'll be at least 6 to 8 months.
8 months.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for our city attorney, Jonathan Kerr, if he's on. My question is whether we could, if someone were to make a motion, approve this application with a provision that it include fire suppression upstairs, if we have that kind of latitude. Obviously, individual members can vote however their conscience leads, but I'm wondering if that's a legitimate provision that we add to it.
That's it. Hi, Chair Long. Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Thank you. That's a good question. It isn't like an application for a development permit or anything like that, where the city can, or the agency in this case, can just sort of tack on conditions. But can you give me like a minute and a half to double check the incentive program grant guidelines? When we implemented this program, we had some provisions that didn't make it into the agreements, but that were sort of incorporated therein. And so I can check very quickly if you just give me a few minutes.
Okay, go ahead and do that. And
Sure.
did staff have any, like maybe you're going to say something, Josh?
No, I think when it comes to fire suppression, I think what Michael probably pointed out here is he's probably getting some direction from Wasco County building codes on this change of use requiring some type of fire suppression. I do know that there is some flexibility with historic buildings, not always required for fire suppression, but most likely if that requirement's coming down, it's coming from Wasco County, and I can't comment to whether or not, I mean, Jonathan's checking the legality of it, whether or not we would have that condition.
I think it's a useful question, not just for the specific case,
Yeah.
but because we have something on the order of $5 million that we're trying to get out the door for various incentive projects. And I can see, given that there's a lot of historic buildings, that we might have some individual quirks or questions that might come up in the next 1 to 3 years. Yeah.
Recently, we hadn't been even covering fire suppression systems.
Correct.
But we've definitely, my knowledge, required it because it was so expensive, but I don't know.
Yeah, this is one of the proposed modifications we'll be bringing up in March. We allow fire suppression now for unused spaces, but for spaces that are currently in use, while we're not changing the use, that's where it's disallowed. But based on the comments we had in January, we are going to be modifying and just outright allowing us to cover fire suppression. But again, that's what we'll be bringing forward in March.
Chair Long?
Yes.
Thank you for indulging me while I double checked on our incentive program grant agreement guidelines. And I'm glad that I did, because it's actually a little illuminating. This project we worked on, by the way, like late 2022. And so it's been a few years. So thank you for indulging me on that. On the section that talks about funding, and again, all of these grant agreements are subject to these guidelines. The section that talks about the actual grant funding, it indicates that the agency board, when they enrolled this program and we updated our urban renewal plan consistent with these guidelines as well, that the agency may condition any grant award on, among other things, anything that the agency deems necessary or appropriate. And so it seems to me that if the agency board makes a finding that it deems this fire suppression system to be necessary or appropriate for this funding to be provided, I think that seems fine, especially if we have some substantial evidence in the record. But yeah.
Jonathan, just repeat that one phrase. It sounded like a key phrase. Anything the board deems necessary or appropriate?
Yes, that's exactly right.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
Thoughts from the applicant on how a requirement like that from the board would affect you in the project?
Well, I mean, we're going to do whatever codes require in regards to building codes as well as, the fire suppression. Obviously that can tack on, another $70,000 to $90,000. That would be our concern that, it's another huge expense that's added on there, especially if through, Wasco County and Oregon and the historic buildings, if we can find alternative methods through, the way that we do our windows and the ladders that sometimes they do on single story house, on two-story buildings where they have the capacity to have the person be able to exit through the window and not have to have fire suppression, and or the that tied with not exceeding the number of feet that is required for code in regards to the capacity for a occupant to exit.
Well, I feel like most people on this board are supportive of this idea, and I appreciate that. For me, to spend money, urban renewal money, even if we had to chunk in more for this is money well spent. I know urban renewal wasn't set up for saving lives, but if I can leave here tonight feeling like I saved some lives, that's what I want to do. And he had a good point that this would go to other buildings too. And if the word gets out that urban renewal is willing to spend money when you upgrade residential area in the urban renewal area on fire suppression, that we'll forward the money for that. Other places are likely going to put that in their plan, whether the code requires it or not. And that's the thing is, I don't care if the code requires it. I want it. And I want to spend urban renewal money on saving lives.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I'm on board with that, because I don't like the idea of forcing people to do something they don't have to do. I think it's good. I think it may be at times it's a good investment, but I'm not going to be inclined to want to force people to do something, spend more money that going through the code process doesn't require it. So just FYI. I did have a question though on the apartments upstairs. Are they planned, or is there are they going to be short-term rentals or long-term rentals, or what's the plan for those?
Long-term rentals.
Okay, so it's going to add to the housing stock.
Yes.
Okay. And there's no desire, or those are definitely not going to be short-term rentals, or I guess they're only going to be rentals, so you're not selling them.
The intention is to have longer term, more than a month.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Other questions? Yes, Kristen.
I also just wanted to kind of pipe up on the sprinkler situation and say that I think that I'm on board with what Walt is saying, but also just raising the point that this is quite a substantial amount of money, and it's also safeguarding the businesses that are next to this building, which is one more thing that I think if we look at those businesses or those the intended use for this building changing, it does make sense that would also be included if this money were given. In my opinion.
It's always been a boarding house or a small hotel.
How long has that been?
Extinguished in the 70s.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Staff, did you have anything to add?
We have nothing further to add, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if you, if the board required you to put in sprinkler systems and ultimately the code did not require that, would you be coming back to urban renewal for some additional funds to help cover that expense?
Clearly have to get a full budget on what that installation is going to cost, but obviously that's probably a good reason to come back.
Yeah. All right. So, this is an action item. So we are looking for, um, a motion tonight.
Is it, if I move to table it, is that a action that you need? Does that work?
Yeah.
We would love to have some direction on this tonight in order to keep this project on track
To
as
keep it moving.
as the applicant mentioned with cost escalation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another month down the road.
Yep. So remind the board if, well, of course, we don't have a number for sprinklers, but I was gonna say, if they needed to come back to us, if they had to do that, how much does that add to their project roughly? Do you know? Do you have numbers?
It's going to be at least 70 to 90,000.
Okay. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm still relatively new. This is actually the first grant application that I get to oversee on this board, so really excited to be here. But I do wonder, are we able to ask if other community members that are present are able to give information if we know that they might have more information if they're comfortable? Is that something we're able to do or no?
That was really vague and I'm not sure what
So
you're
if we
asking.
know that someone in the audience perchance is maybe building a building in town and has an idea of how much a sprinkler system would roughly cost and cost to install, is that something we're able to ask if they'd be willing to share with us?
I'll allow
Since
I could actually, just
Okay.
based on what I know and talking
so
with
I
this,
know
so-
Mary's in the audience as well, and she seems to have a good grasp on how much
Mr.
things
Schechtel.
cost, and so does Mr. Schechtel, as he's also dealing with a building that is older. It seems like they might be willing to share that information with us.
Okay. Start with Dan. Did you wanna?
Figures of 90,000 are not at all with unreasonable from everything I've heard. I think that's the number that Tim is looking at for the Mint, if I recall correctly. I've heard the same amount for a restaurant in town, 60,000 minimal, close to 100,000. And
The same type of system that would be needed for residential, because I know that like it seems like residential systems may not be the same as an Ansel system for a restaurant.
the systems anything that I'm looking at has to do with commercial.
Okay.
Upper story residential is a little bit of a twist on that, yeah. But is all going to be part of the same pressurized system, I should think.
Okay.
Commercial residential.
Mr. Schechtel? Oh, we'll have to have you use the microphone.
Thanks for letting me throw a curveball too.
There's some really good questions that he's presenting and good questions from you all. So when we started our renovation, we actually picked up to renew a permit that we had taken in 2017 that was kind of sidetracked mostly for financial issues. And then when we went back to renew that permit in 2019, the brewery wasn't ready financially to move on that. So we kind of tabled it. Then, you know what the next couple of years ended up being. So when we did in 2021 or 2022, we went back to say, we're going to go forward. What do you need to do as far as updating or renewing or starting a new permit for our work? Well, she looked at the plans. I have experience in drawing plans. I've been doing that for many years as a professional builder. She said, well, we'll have to have professional plans drawn. And then I said, you know, I convinced her that my plans were adequate for that. But then she said, this is the associate building official in the Dalles here. She requested that we have a plan survey or a code survey, which basically is an engineering event that certified engineers will come through and precisely measure every aspect about your building, and then determine the fire rateability of any wall that is in place or could be put in place. And so we ended up having to agree to a fire suppression system, but we were able to isolate areas that were already protected by 2-hour firewalls and had installed fire doors that they basically considered these are safe areas that do not require sprinkling. What I learned from this experience is that safety is of the utmost concern, and I totally agree with you, Walter. The cost difference between a residential area and a commercial area is minimal. They just use different spacing and different heads to direct the water suppression. So it's not going to save any money there or cost more. It will be roughly within the range that Dan mentioned. The numbers that we got for our system were a little high before the survey came in, and once the engineering survey came in and said, well, this does not need it and this does not need it because it's already protected by 2-hour separation. So I think building codes will prevail, and I think it's a really good thing that they insisted upon that. It's really not worth the risk, and to build out your town and then not have sufficient safety for the residents there and in the future. And if you think it's a long shot, I wouldn't bet on it, but things will happen. I mean, if you look at what happened in LA, that's terrifying. I would never want to see anything like that here. So thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Mary said she'd be willing to, if we're willing.
Yes, I'm
to
sorry. I didn't
hear her out.
realize.
So sorry.
Yes, sorry, you do have to come up. We need to get it on the
Also, thank you.
recording. Thank you.
I don't want to contradict Dan or Michael, but we are currently doing a project in Canby where we did a historic renovation of their former city hall, and upstairs is commercial and downstairs we're turning it into an apartment unit because it's not leasing as commercial, and we were required to put in sprinklers, and I think it's like $5,000. And then at your suggestion just now, I looked up what we're paying for the new construction building. It's $3.40 a square foot. So I don't know if you guys have bids for those, but they seemed high. I wrote you a note. Viking sprinkler.
Thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate you.
Okay.
Question for just a process question. Could we take this up and leave the sprinkler question out if the board so desired, and leaving them the option to come back with a quote request?
I think why I was directing some of this questioning is I'm looking for a motion so that they can move forward. But if the board motion, if someone makes a motion, it passes that requires that, I just want to make sure that we know what that means to them and to the project and to us.
Well, I was thinking to make a motion without including the sprinklers as a requirement, and if we could allow them to come back and modify or have a follow-up request.
Yes.
Is that acceptable or allowed?
Yes.
Yeah, but it would be under a different form. So currently the 240,000 is the cap that this project can be funded through the incentive program. So if you want them to come back at a later date, we would be looking at some type of separate funding mechanism. So, for the board, we designed the incentive program to be the streamlined process. More than happy to adding conditions to this if we need to, but I think this might be something that will come up in the future if we get a project that is going to hit the max of an incentive program and they need a little bit more money. It's going to go into our conversation later. what's that next step for funding for this? With $5 million, we want to get out to these properties. So what's that next step? Because right now we hit the ceiling with an incentive program. We can go through similar to the Basalt Commons, has an incentive program and a development funding agreement. But if you're looking at the development funding agreement, a lot of time and energy and resources goes into the development funding agreement for something like $730,000. Yeah, I think it's worth doing the time. When you're looking at a $70,000, $80,000 sprinkler system, is the agency interested in a DFA of, something that doesn't even reach 100,000? So if that adds to the conversation too in your decision making, hopefully that helps.
So I haven't heard the entire board weigh in, so I don't know what the consensus is, but I would just put on the record that I agree with Scott Hagee that requiring something above and beyond what is required by codes, I don't think is necessarily fair. If they choose to do it, that's fine, but I personally wouldn't be supportive of requiring that. But I'm also not making the motions. Yes.
Still new. Do we require all codes and that to be followed to grant this money as well? Just
Yes.
confirming.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Nope, great question.
And so does the law as well. So even if we didn't,
But just got to make sure.
She's new. That's fair.
New.
Yeah.
So I guess my problem or my the thing that's making me scratch my head, Walt et al., is if we say you must have sprinklers, it's not required, but it's an extra $70,000 or $80,000 bill. That definitely changes the parameters of this project and whether it's feasible for them, and if it's a real hurdle for us to fund at this point. That makes me less excited about making them include sprinklers if they don't have to already.
Guess I wasn't involved in this until now. I was looking at the plans and hoping to find that it was going to be sprinklered, and there was no indicator at all that it was.
Yeah.
And it's just super concerning to me that we're going to do residential area without fire suppression. And I appreciate, everybody kind of understanding where I'm coming from. That's good and everything. And it may be unfair to say, you're almost there to get the money, but, we have one more little thing that we're going to require. But somehow or another, I want urban renewal money to be available for people for life safety considerations. So I don't know how we can do that. Maybe we can't make it on this project, but somehow I would like to make it clear that if you're putting in residential stuff in the urban renewal area, even though if the code doesn't require it, we're not going to help fund the project if that's not going to be part of it. And that might seem kind of heavy-handed, but you have to be proactive to save lives. The airplane crash in Toronto, the wings broke off because of design and engineering, saved a whole bunch of lives. It wasn't just a fluke that plane had a lot of survivors. So we need to think about how we can be proactive. The lives we save aren't going to be people tomorrow or the next day and stuff like that. We might all be dead when we save those lives, but that's our responsibility in my book.
So I have a follow-up question about that since it's hot, and then Ben has more questions. So, are you saying that the codes and the fire marshal's requirements, if they determine that it's not needed to save lives, that you want to go a step beyond what the professionals are saying is required?
Yes, I do. I know that there's a lot of codes that do require sprinkler systems in certain circumstances. I think the urban renewal area is a little bit unique in that we're dealing with older buildings, and like she brought up, if it does catch on fire, it's possibly going to spread to a block or more, something like that. And so putting the fire out right away is desirable, but also the people that live in there, the residents, in a commercial building like the Mint or something like that, it's not as big a concern to me. But in a residential situation, this is how you put out the fire early on and save lives. I would desire to have lots and lots of sprinklers in all residences. And so being an advocate for that is, I feel, is one of my responsibilities in my career as a firefighter, to constantly talk about how you actually do save lives. And smoke detectors save lives. They don't put out fires. I love smoke detectors. Sprinkler systems save lives and put out fires, so the whole block doesn't burn down.
I understand that, but there are other fire suppression methods other than just sprinklers that could
Yes.
satisfy that, like the firewall and a couple of other things that were mentioned. I'm not an expert, but I would think that codes knows exactly needs to happen. I did say he
Okay.
was next, but does it fit in with what we're?
Well, I was
does
just
it
going to
make sense?
follow up. I don't want to get into a debate here, but National Fire Protection, all the folks that you work with, they're involved in developing these codes. They develop codes based on everything you're talking about. I know you want like sprinklers everywhere, but it's not really like what your agencies that oversee you have determined and worked with the codes people to determine what is actually needed. So I think if we want to not believe that our codes people are doing a good job, then we can overstep them. I don't think that's a good thing to do. I'm not going to be supportive of it, but putting additional rules on our constituents that aren't even required by federal and state agencies just I'm not a fan of that.
Thank you. And thanks for waiting.
No worries. Thanks, Sharon. I think that maybe an alternative to this, because I think sprinklers are good, but I also identify that it is a specific solution to the problem. So I'm wondering if how the rest of the board feels about maybe putting a blurb in the agreement that states fire will build fire suppression systems in accordance with codes, county, city codes, to when they do renovate the structure. Because I also agree that adding on more to do that is above and beyond what may be required from a building codes requirement is burdensome. I think that it's definitely well intentioned, but I would be very hesitant as well to include that, because that just makes things so much more difficult to get over the goal line.
Well, we're not requiring, if they want to renovate their building, we don't have the power to require them to do anything, but we have the power to say, if you want urban renewal money for your project, we have certain things that we require.
Sure, and that's why my suggestion of verbiage in there that states that addresses the fire suppression or fire detection requirements. I think that's appropriate.
I do think that, according, your desire is that, hey, the NFPA standards and all the building codes and stuff have been scrutinized and they're all appropriate and everything. The fight is also about, well, how much is this going to cost? When they discuss all this, we can impose all this stuff, but it's going to cost somebody. So that, debate has happened, and they back off a little bit on what is sometimes felt to be best practices. Now, from what I understand, the city of Vancouver, BC, there's no new buildings, commercial or residential, they're allowed that aren't sprinklered. And so they went above and beyond what the rest of Canada decides, and that's what I'm searching for here is, and partly because we're dealing with old buildings. And, if the group's not comfortable with doing that yet, everybody gets their vote. And I kind of came in at the last minute for these folks that are trying to get the money to proceed forward. And I don't want to be unfair, but there's, I disagree with the idea that all the building codes and stuff have thought about all this well and have science to back up where they're at. And I'm all for all kinds of fire suppression systems and stuff, but the only one that currently is available to me that has the credibility to say this saves lives is smoke detectors and sprinkler systems.
Anybody else comment, questions?
Ask one more question.
Yes, Kristen.
Do we know like when you will know whether you are required by code? I'm just surprised, I guess, that there's not knowledge on it with plans on paper. That seems strange.
So it will be a permit. Yeah. So we had our initial planning meetings. And so we talked about fire suppression and different elements. And so it may ultimately be required. But at this point, we're not clear on that. But permits will not get issued without the determination, which is kind of what we've all been talking about, which is driven by state and county code.
Staff, downspots.
It's interesting because this discussion really touches upon one of the final items in the agenda that's talking about trying to looking at the threshold that we have now that Director Chandler mentioned, the 240 we have now, and this issue, which I assure you is going to come up over and over again. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can help resolve this by deferring this decision tonight. Sounds like this question over code is one that's hanging out there. We don't know. Assuredly, he's not going to get COO unless he meets code. So the question is code requiring sprinklers? Later in this meeting, we'll be talking about trying to identify a higher threshold for IP. If that's something we want to do before we kick into automatically development funding agreements for something that exceeds $240,000, $240,001, we're into a development funding agreement. If we expand that threshold, 100,000, we'll probably take a lot of the complexity out of this debate, but we can't do that tonight. That's not until the March meeting, and that's up to you anyway. That is a discussion item, and County Assessor Amory is here tonight to go into details on that. It touches upon the return on investment that we've talked about a number of times. So it's just an idea. Defer and explore a little bit more. Hate to do it, but.
Scott Hagee?
Okay, I'm gonna suggest we have some individuals or company or whatever that came and made a request. They know whatever they know or whatever they don't know, but they're requesting a certain amount, and I think it's reasonable to address the request tonight. I'm going to make a motion to move to authorize the agency manager to execute and implement an incentive program grant agreement with Claudia Leash in the amount not to exceed $240,000 as presented.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded to authorize the agency manager to execute the incentive program agreement. All in favor, say aye.
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 He just said Tim McLaughlin says aye.
McLaughlin, aye.
I know, I got
Raise my
confused for a
hand.
second too. I was like, that's too many words. All opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions?
I'll abstain as I don't feel like there's adequate information. Thank you.
All right. So the motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I gotta get to my, next we have item 8B, adoption of resolution 001, a resolution authorizing a contribution not to exceed $150,000 in support of the Federal Street Plaza project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members. As part of the substantial, we added a number of projects specifically to the urban renewal plan. Some of these had already been well underway. In keeping with best practices, it was good to actually put them into the plan. Basalt Commons, Tony's Town and Country building acquisition, demolition, and site rehabilitation, First Street reconstruction, and Federal Street Plaza. Federal Street Plaza is primarily a city project with basically relatively minor support from urban renewal, but we did wish to invest urban renewal funds in the project to the extent that we could leverage other funding. And in some of the calculations that we placed, and I believe also in a number of public presentations, I had mentioned 150,000, and I wanted to not change that, basically wanted to formalize it so that we have the assurance going forward that it's not a larger amount than that. On April 1st, and actually, I hope before April 1st, we'll be submitting a application to Oregon State Parks and Recreation requesting $1 million to offset a substantial amount of the Federal Street Plaza project. We do not yet have final cost confirmation on Federal Street. It will likely be more than that. So what we're asking tonight is allocation of 150,000 urban renewal investment as partial match for that state parks grant. The city itself would be coming up with an additional amount. The total percentage required by Oregon State Parks is 40%. So ours would be a minor contribution toward the 40%. Oregon State Parks does require a resolution demonstrating that staff have the authority to submit a grant. And so in March, we will be presenting a similar resolution to City Council. And that resolution will actually give staff the authority to submit the grant application. Tonight, we're asking for a resolution to actually allocate that 150,000. We have approached the Parks District on this one, and Director Baker there, number one, is supportive. Number two, has requested a resolution that would direct his own district to help either provide a letter of support, perhaps some funding toward the match, or both. And I do not know the decision there. I don't believe that meeting has taken place yet, but I need to check on that. So that's the background on this one. I would ask for a resolution, again, in keeping with the goal and the project that we identified in the urban renewal plan back in December. And you have a motion for your consideration on page 85 of the packet.
Questions for staff?
You may have said this, Dan, but it slipped past me. How much is the state parks grant potentially?
Correct. We will be requesting 1 million. That's the cap under the
Thank you.
Local government grant program of state parks.
Well, shifting to comment, I would just say, fully support it. This is a good project, and that's a great investment. Whether or not the state grant is one, but particularly for leveraging the grant.
Sure. Ms. Lilovic, did you have something to add?
Oh, no, I was just going to make the motion if no one else was.
Then my thought is, man, I'm just always a problem for everybody. But so this group at some point agreed to do the First Street project, and I'm all on board with that's what we agreed to do. We need to fund that. That's what the agreement is. But, you know, we probably should have said, no, the city's going to have to take care of some of this. We didn't, but we need to live up to our agreement. But I'm not in favor of funding this. I think the city needs to fund this. And so I'm going to be a no on this also, because this is a city project. Urban renewal money needs to go to the projects that we're committed to. And when we have those finished and see how much money we got left, we have a lot of projects. We don't know how much they're going to cost.
Questions, comments?
I think Walt's exactly right in the sense that we need to fund projects that raise property values. And I'm convinced that this plaza will do that and will enhance or increase the potential for whatever goes into the Tony site to be successful. And it's a pretty modest amount of money. So, well, I take your point. I feel like this is a good investment for property values.
Put the carousel down there next to the plaza. That would enhance things and everything too. But the plaza itself isn't going to be paying taxes. And that's kind of where I'm coming from is, you know, I'm supportive of projects that are going to enhance buildings that, and she'll address that later. will actually turn into tax revenue for different districts at the end. So I've been trying to be supportive of that, but the plaza will never generate taxes for the fire district directly.
Well, directly, no, it won't be paying property taxes, but then it's not paying property taxes now. So it's the, it's a net win and not a net and no loss, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay, more questions, comments, motion? That's a motion, not emotion.
I'll make the motion if no one else will. I move to adopt resolution number 25001 as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll keep you posted on the application to State Parks. Proceed to the next item.
Yeah, I gotta figure out the whole iPad so I don't have to like scroll every time back to my agenda. Okay. So now we have our discussion items. 9A, consideration of agency return on investment for property rehabilitation grants and development funding agreement requirements.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With appreciation to County Assessor Joe Amory, who has been here throughout the meeting, I'd like to go into a discussion item starting on page 102 of the packet, consideration of agency return on investment for property rehabilitation grants and development funding agreement requirements. So a couple of related issues here. One, Director Amory will be going through a series of slides, I think that were also attached in your presentation, that speaks to some of the complexities involved in establishing return on investment on projects, especially around terms like guaranteeing that a given project will return additional tax value, when in fact that becomes a very difficult assurance to make. And I will defer to Jill Amory on that discussion. Toward the end of the staff report, though, we also talk about the question of the threshold between incentive program and development funding agreements. And leading toward the March discussion on this topic, love to have additional guidance from you as to whether we can somehow pin down that. Right now, we have Basalt Commons at one end of the spectrum, $1.7 million investment. And we have incentive program funding capped at $240,000. In between there is a big gray area. And if it's 241 and $1, then we're in the DFA discussion. And that adds complexity, it adds time. So later in this discussion tonight on this item, I'd love to have some additional guidance on that. But right now, I'd like to turn this over to Jill to walk through her presentation.
Good evening, Chair, board members. Jill Amory, your assessor and tax collector for Wasco County. Interesting discussion tonight as you're all talking and we're talking about the specific project of the Oak Hotel. You're talking about urban renewal paying taxes, not paying taxes on a specific project. They're both very complex issues. Am I a little taller here? There aren't easy answers. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but urban renewal really is about blight and is about investing in a community, not specifically a project that is going to return taxes. It should draw business, it should draw investment that then will bring some taxes. And when we look at specific projects, a new project, Salt Commons, is easy to say that's going to bring new tax dollars. The rehab projects, Oak Hotel, as you're talking numbers and I'm sitting back there, like, is there a specific number I could give you? I can't. I have more than 20 years of appraisal experience, and I can't sit here and tell you a specific number. Now, when the project's done, we'll go about our work. We will calculate what the addition to the maximum assessed value is. And the market is what tells us what the real market value will be. And that's why appraisers are licensed. That's why they get the education, the training, the continual education. It's not easy. So with that being said, I did try to, as we talked about last month, lay out some information in the slides. I'm not going to go through and read it to you because I assume you looked at it, but I will try and hit some highlights. And even with this, it's not black and white. And you're not going to be able to walk down to the Oak Street Hotel and tell me, what the real market value is or what the tax return is going to be on the investment. It's just not that simple. So I tried to give you just a little bit of overview of the program on the first page of when Measure 47 came in, when Measure 50 came in, and how the program really works. Measure 50 really says we're going to do this thing called maximum assessed value, and that's what's limited to 3% increases, with the exception of if you do some of these things, add a garage, add a second or third floor downtown, you start changing and adding and investing, then that can allow your maximum assessed value to go up more than 3%. And that's what we call those exception events. And so that's why you'll hear that word quite a lot. Then on the next page, really just gave you some examples of how we do those calculations year over year. Gave you a little definition of some of the values that we track in our business of mass appraisal. We track the maximum assessed value, which is what Measure 50 set. We track the assessed value. We track the real market value. And then there's a slew of others that I won't go into, but those are the main ones that we do the measurement twice to come up with the assessed value. And so we laid that out for you, and hopefully that'll help a little bit in talking about, well, what is our ROI? And then on the following page, the increases to the MAV, or the maximum assessed value. All of these rules are in Oregon revised statutes. We have guidelines in Oregon administrative rules, and those are the rules that we follow. Those are the rules that give us our guidelines to do our job. And so I laid out, here are some of the things that fall under that exception event where your maximum assessed value can go over 3%. They're new construction, reconstruction, major additions. We have this annual and 5-year period, and it's just changed with legislation over the last couple of years. So if in a major addition, I were to invest more than $18,200, typically that's going to go straight to my maximum assessed value. If I do little bits and stay under the 18.2 per year and 45,000 over a 5-year period, that may not go to my maximum assessed value. And there's more but-fors in that, but I won't go there for you. Then we've got remodeling, and it's really about a renovation that changes the basic plan, form, or style of the property. And then rehabilitation, it would restore a former condition without changing the basic plan, form, or style of the structure. And even with those, you could ask me 10 questions specifically about what was done, and it's not black and white. We really have to look at every project individually, and that's where appraisal judgment comes in, and that's why it's so difficult, especially when you get into commercial and these historic buildings. It does get quite complex. On the following page with the examples, it just runs through, if I were to upgrade, and we're talking about residential or, maybe residential on top of commercial, if I were to upgrade an existing kitchen and I'm investing $40,000 in value, is it reconstruction? No. Is it a major addition under this circumstance? No. Is it a renovation? Not under this circumstance. Is it a rehabilitation? No. Is it a remodel? Yes. Why? Because the upgrade resulted in a change of form or style. And there are so many ins and outs still of that. I think there's a good example on the following page, where when we talk about general ongoing maintenance and repair, and that's where an exception, is it an exception event or is it GOMAR? New property or new improvements don't include general ongoing maintenance and repair. What it really does is preserves the condition of the existing improvements, and it allows the improvements to achieve a useful life that is typical for the type and quality of the original improvements. That gets much more complex when we're talking about an Oak Street hotel. And how much of that value, say if we're investing $500,000 to really preserve the building, and I were to put that, say it was my property, and then I were to turn around and put it on the market, would the market even give me back that $500,000 I just invested as real market value? And what do we book that maximum assessed value at? And so really it's about preservation, replacement of worn out components. In this day and age where products are changing so quickly, there's an example in here where in a house, especially in our neighborhoods, we might have old aluminum windows and it's time to change out the windows. I finally want to upgrade to something better. Well, old aluminum windows aren't available to make the same one for one replacement. So the next available would be vinyl windows. So that's not going to be considered an exception event. It's going to be considered general ongoing maintenance and repair. So the final thought was that the determination of whether an improvement constitutes GOMAR or an exception event is the most subjective issue relating to MAV. That really is where appraisal judgment comes in. Each specific situation has to be considered carefully and individually. And I hate saying it over and over again. It's not an easy nut to crack when you're talking about return on investment. I don't know if I'm hoping this was somewhat helpful, if nothing else, to show you how complex it really is and how individual each project really is. I think the examples again tonight are great. I'm really excited to see a project of a rehab Oak Street Hotel happen and for my team to walk through that in appraisal. And that's something if the project does get complete and we get to do our jobs, I would love to come back and share with you if you'd be up for that and sort of walk you through what that experience was like and really be able to highlight, was there a return on investment? If so, what was it? It is also somewhat dependent on the real estate and economy, because if, say, heaven forbid, our economy were to tank again and our real estate market were to tank again, and that real market value were to drop below the maximum assessed value, they now would be taxed on the real market value. So your return on investment has gone away. That's really about the economy. And that happened after the 09 crash when our market really tanked. I remember Commissioner Hagee asking me how many units in Wasco County are taxed on their real market value. It was in excess of 20%. That means in excess of 20% of properties, their real market value had dropped below their maximum assessed value. So it is a really complex problem to try and answer. Again, I want to be as helpful as I can and give you guys as much information as I can. Not easy to say.
That's as much of an answer as or definitive. So
Well, if nothing else, hopefully it gives you some more understanding of really how complex it is and difficulty of, again, a new project is fairly easy, to wrap your arms around. The older ones, maybe you don't look for ROI. Maybe you look for the preservation or more of what urban renewal, if you look it up, more of what urban renewal really talks about, which is to really minimize blight, to really preserve what you have.
Thank you.
Just a thought. Absolutely.
Questions on the presentation for Jill? Yes, Sky.
I always got to ask a question, right, Jill? Can you talk a little bit? Let's just say as a hypothetical, we're talking about the hotel or the what we're talking about. So what is the process that happens when that's complete? Do they call you up and say, we're ready for you to come visit, take a look at it, whatever? But I'm curious, are we going in there to try to determine what the real market value is? Or are we going in there to try to determine, or how is it determined what the MAV is with, I mean, I know if it's an exception. I mean, in this case, it's clearly going to be an exception, in my opinion, because the investment level would be high relative to whatever's there. So how do you determine what how the MAV changes versus the RMV? Because the real market value is kind of, any kind of appraiser can go in there and use comps and all that kind of stuff, but the MAV is a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, thank you. So I know it's going to be, I would love it if people would call us and say, we're done, come visit. That's not the norm. Michael will do that. So our appraisal team will go out and they'll do a site visit. And when there is new construction, we always ask for an interior inspection. Again, what we do is mass appraisal. It's statistical. We don't typically go inside. It's not like when you buy a house and a fee appraiser comes out and they have full access. That doesn't often happen. But when there's new construction or upgrades, building permits are pulled, we do try to get access. So the team will come out and they will go through hopefully the financial package and the investment that was made with the owner. And we'll look at the improvements that were made. And then we will gauge, say it's $500,000 that was invested as upgrades or new construction, fire suppression, whatever went into it. There's an extra step where we have to apply that to something we call changed property ratio, our CPR, and say it was at 0.5. So we would take that $500,000 investment, apply the 0.5. So we would add $250,000 to the MAV. And then that goes essentially straight to the taxable value. The real market value, you're correct, Scott, would be based upon the market.
So to me, it's interesting, because I think that's an important component that this ratio is, because as investments made, it doesn't the $500,000 doesn't go on the tax rolls. A portion of that does based on this ratio, but that does directly go on the tax rolls and does start producing taxes.
Correct. And again, always hesitate not to add more complexities and but-fors. Measure 50 really bred inequity. They didn't know at the time. We don't know what we don't know, right? And with our old structures, the way it was implemented, a new building is more than likely going to have a higher MAV than the older building. And so that's where sometimes we see the real market value and the assessed value not being very far apart. So depending on what's going on with the market, that really can impact it. And that's where we get our compression, which is a whole nother conversation. The closer those are, the more compression we get, which also impacts the districts and reduces the tax amount that they get.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for your time and putting that presentation together. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm always here to help. If you have more questions, I'm happy to come back.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Board member comments and questions.
And
Yeah.
Chair, I had just a very interesting, speaking of old buildings, I had an interesting occasion to see one picture in Victor's tea shop the other day. Encourage you guys to go in and check that out. It's pretty fun, but there's a picture of the old St. Mary's Academy on there, which is stunning. And it, lost, I don't know what the story is, Victor, maybe you do, but somewhere along the way, they decided they didn't need an academy and tore it down. And it is stunning. It's a beautiful building. And so I was noodling on that and on this in the last, I don't know, couple of weeks, because it's a lot of money that we're proposing to put into some of these old buildings. I mean, it just doesn't pencil out. If it did, the people wouldn't need public support for bringing some of our old buildings back into shape, back into code, back into habitable conditions. But the alternative is we let the downtown core just sort of sink under its own weight of history and never get the investment that's needed to make it hopefully vital and prosperous and usable and livable for the decades to come. And it seems like a really straightforward or common sense idea that, we look at this return on investment. It's like, of course, that makes sense, right? If someone says you should, do the math and see if it pencils out. Well, and the last thing I'll say is I just keep coming back to this quote from a writer a long time ago named Mencken, who said, "For every complex problem, there's a solution that is clear and simple and wrong." And I think we've kind of come to that understanding here that it's just not that easy to do the common sense thing in keeping our downtown alive.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Quick comment. Thanks, Chair Long. I think I've thought a lot about this since our last meeting, and I have I came to the conclusion early on that the assessed value is going to be a very difficult metric to measure the return on investment, right? You can only increase it so much per year unless there's exceptions and things like that. But I think one of the other goals here is as a city is to bring in new business, retain old business, create more jobs. There's a housing market strategy, and the way that I kind of look at this is looking at like things like economic activity and private investment. If an area is going to be, if you're going to have an increase in private investment if the community at large is worthwhile, right? If your downtown area looks worn down and tired, there's probably going to be less private investment. And since I've moved here in 2009, I've seen a lot more private investment. So I think it's headed the right direction. How we accelerate that, I don't know. I'm all for getting more like good ideas to think of creative ways to do that. But there's other ways to assess the performance of urban renewal and we talk about return on investment, and everybody thinks about that as like a strictly monetary thing, and it needs to be that needs to be a measurement. But when you're talking about economic activity, private investment, or property market growth, increasing the market value of the real properties that are downtown, I think is also something that needs to be considered. And I think that reduction in turnover in small businesses downtown, right? People are going to want to rent spaces that don't need a lot of investment for them to move in. So those are kind of the things that have been going through my mind the last month or so since we met last time. And yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. Any other comments? How about staff comments, updates, project updates?
On this topic still?
Well, I mean, it's just purely staff comments and project updates. So, yep. Your final say before executive session.
We would like to bring forward some recommendations in March on the property rehabilitation program and trying to nail down that threshold and the ROI. Look forward to that discussion in March. Beyond that, I have no comments. Josh? Okay.
Okay. Well, in that case, the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Agency Board will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.6602E, which allows the board to meet in executive session to deliberate with persons designated by it to negotiate real property transactions. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return to open session and welcome the audience back into the room. We expect to return in about 30 minutes.